Brothers of the Imperium, Space Marine 2 is finally here. It's a game we have been eagerly waiting for over a decade, and now that it's arrived, how does it stack up? After over 300 hours, we've maxed out every class, tested every weapon, and played through every bit of PvE content the game has to offer. For some, this might already be your game of the year. For others, you truly have no idea what to expect, and that is where we come in. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and today we're bringing you our review for Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2. To start, we want to thank our friends over at Focus Entertainment for providing us with review copies of the game. As always, we're under no obligation to review games, and our opinions are entirely our own. Space Marine 2 is a game that's been on our must-play list for a while. We've taken the time to truly dive deep, and to say we're impressed is an understatement. So here's the headline. Space Marine 2 is not only a worthy successor to the 2011 title, but it pushes visual fidelity, action, and immersion at nearly every turn. Your Space Marine, in most instances, looking at you Vanguard, feels like the half-ton juggernauts they're supposed to be. With each swing of your melee weapon, each bolter round fired, and each brutal execution performed, you feel like a lore-accurate Astartes carving your way through the enemies of mankind. For a third-person horde shooter, both the ranged and melee action is brutal. The controls are responsive, the narrative is coherent and engaging, and there is a very clear skill curve to the game via its parrying system that feels incredibly rewarding to master. Space Marine 2 truly takes the best of Saber Interactive's previous work and combines it with the rich Warhammer 40K universe in a way nobody has been able to do before. Our team has loved almost every second of our experience with this game, and that's something we plan on talking about. At a macro level, Space Marine 2 is made up of three core experiences. A campaign mode, which you can play in 3-player co-op or entirely solo. Operations, which are replayable missions that run parallel to the various story beats in the campaign and feature their own class and weapon progression systems. And Eternal War, PvP, where 2 teams of 6 engage in classic arena-based game modes. After our time with the preview, we figured the Battle Barge, the main hub, would just have more areas to walk between to engage with all of these game modes, but it turns out each is truly its own self-contained environment. When you engage with the terminal to select one of these modes, you'll load into a unique area and all of the content will shift to reflect that game mode until you change it again. Campaign has you taking control of fixed characters with virtually no progression elements, while Operations and Eternal War have completely separate character progression systems. Progression in one mode does not carry over to any of the others, which was definitely one of our early concerns. In our opinion, having PvE and PvP progression separate is a fantastic idea for the health of each game mode, and allows the team to safely balance and add content long-term that, in theory, mitigates some risk of breaking the game. In terms of the campaign, we genuinely have a lot of positive things to say, and as always, I'm going to avoid any major spoilers such as cinematics, boss fights, and so on. In total, with our level of experience with the game already, so understanding all of the nuances of combat and the various weapons and enemies, we clocked in around 7.5 hours from start to finish playing solo. This might not sound like a lot to some of you who were concerned about the early reports of the overall story length, but simply put, this campaign, for a person well-versed in Warhammer 40K, is a visual feast, and even for those who don't know anything about this universe, it's narratively engaging from start to finish. The cinematics are beautiful, the missions all uniquely different objective-wise, and some of the encounters and locations end up being truly surprising, especially when Chaos begins worming their way into the mix. The environments on their own are staggering from a scale perspective, and with Saber Interactive's Horde technology allowing thousands of Tyranids to flood both the active gameplay areas as well as the distant background environments, you constantly feel like you're on the edge of a wave of death, actively trying to consume a planet. The contrast in environment is also really impressive. Just on Kadaku, one of the game's planets, the dense jungle foliage allows Tyranids to come from seemingly any direction, contrasted so well with the claustrophobic internal sections of this planet where you're slowly working through Imperial fortifications and Adeptus Mechanicus facilities. The jump to planet Avarax then shifts that experience entirely as you fight through different levels of a massive Imperial city. During one mission, you're at the absolute apex in the planet's upper atmosphere, allowing you to see the Imperial fleet engaging with the Tyranid hive fleet swarming the planet. Other missions take you down to the lower regions and various temples, giving you an excellent experience of what these megalithic cities truly entail for the first time in a Warhammer game. One thing we really enjoyed was being able to actively find and pick up any weapon in the game and change your loadout on the fly. This just felt like a really smart design decision rather than making our character have progressed elements that potentially restricted our gameplay within each mission. Like I said, mostly positive, but there are two things that really stood out as negatives within the campaign that just left us scratching our heads. To start, yes, the Flamer is in the game, but it's only available at the time of this review in the campaign, inaccessible in Operations or PvP. Praise the Emperor for that. The sections of the campaign where the Flamer was featured were easily our least favorite across the three of us that played through the review copy, due to how clunky it felt. In fact, we wouldn't be surprised if the team revisits this weapon entirely if they decide to bring it into other parts of the game in the future. I know a lot of people were excited for that weapon, I was amongst them, but sadly, it's just gimmicky. That's far more fan service than anything else, and at this point, can't stack up against the other, more highly polished weapons in the game. The other point is that jump packs in the campaign have vastly increased functionality and maneuverability compared to their Operation counterparts. The two versions are so wildly different that after playing through the campaign, we genuinely began to not enjoy playing the Assault class during Operations. This is one thing we really hope the devs take a second look at because we see no real downside to making the jump pack more versatile in Operations. In fact, it would drastically help the slightly lackluster Assault class feel comparable to some of the other class offerings. On the Operations end of things, this is truly where the PvE replayability kicks into full force, and honestly, if these didn't exist, we'd feel a lot less positive about Space Marine 2's overall value. At this point, you'll pick from 6 different classes: Tactical, Assault, Vanguard, Bulwark, Sniper, and Heavy. You can only have one class per squad, and each one brings their own unique loadout of perks, weapons, and abilities to a squad's overall composition. As you level up your specific class, you'll craft different builds through a combination of class-specific perks, as well as weapons and weapon perks that all directly impact your playstyle. Overall, we found that it was best to wait until the campaign notifies you of an additional available operation, as it weaves narratively into your active campaign mission. At that point, experiencing the specific operation allows you to live through key moments of the campaign from the perspective of an additional tactical squad tackling secondary objectives in order to bring each main campaign story beat to their climactic moment. Doing it this way was so smart and turned this mode from a simple PvE grindfest to an actual connected experience that elevates and extends the campaign overall. Again, we don't want to spoil the actual story beats here, but a prime example of how this plays out is in the Decapitation mission that we previewed here on the channel. In the operation, we take down a Hive Tyrant, and that actually plays into a key moment within the campaign. You sit back for a moment and go, hey wait, I did that, or my buddies and I just did that, and it's an awesome connected experience. I think it's also important to point out that while Operation Inferno and Decapitation feel more like introductory missions, it's certainly by design, as the other 4 operations have unique encounters and mechanics, as well as enemy composition. The additional operations present a harder experience, and some even mixed Chaos and Tyranid enemies together for a different dynamic. Given our over 300 plus hours already with the game, we definitely think more difficulties in Operations post-launch will add a lot of long-term success and replayability to the title. We do have a few negative things to talk about as far as Operations go. There are a solid chunk of perks in both the respective weapon trees, as well as the class perk trees that genuinely feel like they'll never be picked. There are several builds possible per class, but if a lot of these perks were stronger, or changed up the way a weapon or class played, we're looking at easily 2 to 3 times more the amount of potential builds. For instance, every signature perk on the Sniper genuinely feels like there would be a reason to consider one over the other, while the Heavy signature perk, Coolant Reserve, felt like an option that encouraged your teammates to die so you could have a different experience. Post-launch, there's going to be a lot of dialogue and community feedback around perks, and we're confident Saber is going to make some adjustments, but our perspective at this point is that build variety feels more restrictive than expansive, and that takes a few points away from our overall enjoyment of the game, especially given how much time we spent in operations. We do also need to call out the limited functionality of the loadout system. It's great the team has loadouts at launch, let's be clear, but all the system currently does is save your weapon choices. It doesn't take into account your class perks or weapon perks that you'd prefer to save for a specific build. Those remain a global choice, which is problematic when a weapon requires you to alter 3+ nodes on your class perk tree to make the synergy work. If you use a loadout function during an operation, all you get is the weapon change, but your perks remain whatever you selected in the armoring hall, and that ends up defeating the purpose of the loadout system entirely. This needs a hard look, and we're optimistic it'll be addressed. Then there's Eternal War, and unfortunately, despite this mode being fully accessible to us during the review period, given the limited number of people doing other things while reviewing the game, we couldn't find a single matchmaking instance that allowed us to actually review this aspect of the game. We tried on multiple occasions, on multiple days, to get a match going, but no luck. We know there are 3 game modes: Seize Ground, Capture and Control, and Annihilation, all of which were game modes in Space Marine 1, but we have no idea how many maps there are or how the class balance and progression feels. Again, progression in Eternal War is separate from that of the Operations game mode, and all weapons unlock based on your veterancy level with each class, so the more you play, the more options you have at your disposal. We wish we could have given you all a true accounting of this mode, but sadly, it just wasn't in the cards. Putting aside some of the more action-focused gameplay elements, I want to briefly talk about the armoring hall and customization, because Space Marine 2 has a stellar offering when it comes to tailoring your Marine, and you can choose to make it as lore accurate or inaccurate as you'd like. Weapon variety is something I think will be a major sticking point amongst players. Each class has a limited pool of weapons to choose from in their primary, secondary, and melee offerings across both PvE and PvP. Not all classes have access to a primary or melee weapon in certain cases, but in a lot of instances, the primary offerings are pretty decent. However, classes that don't have access to a primary weapon don't feel as complete as they should, since there are currently only 3 different sidearms in the game and 4 melee weapons, with most classes having access to only 1 or 2 within those categories. The Warhammer 40K universe has a lot more weapons that could have been included here, and while that may be the long-term plan, having so few at launch for something like the Assault really makes that specific class a lot less enjoyable to play and progress. That being said, let's pivot and talk about the gunplay and melee combat, because for those of you who haven't gone hands-on, it is simply cathartic getting to use some of the most iconic weapons in the 40K universe. Overall, weapons feel tightly tuned, and for the most part, are accurate to the source material they're being drawn from. Bolters hit with the appropriate level of punch, plasma weapons disintegrate enemies in the blink of an eye, and melee weapons of all sorts make light work of any enemy unfortunate enough to meet the business end of a blade. Learning enemy attack patterns and getting comfortable dodging and parrying is a core part of the combat gameplay, rewarding those players that master the system. There wasn't a single weapon available during our more than 300 hours of playtime that didn't feel viable, even at the highest difficulty, and that's no small feat. You'll learn the core combat mechanics quickly enough, but players that get a handle on all the nuances are the ones that will be pushing into the hardest difficulty the fastest. And that's a testament to the balance baked right into the game from top to bottom. One element of Space Marine 2 we think will blow players away is visual customization. There is a staggering amount of options to choose from, and if you've ever dreamed of bringing your own Space Marine to life, Space Marine 2 nails that experience. Colors, patterns, emblems, and even some iconic armor elements exist for 10 Astartes chapters, 8 Unknown Foundings, and 6 Heretic Astartes chapters. The Ultramarines DLC adds another 13 successor chapters to this pool as well, with even more coming based on the team's roadmap. At launch, each class has roughly 66 different armor pieces to unlock, which can be done just by playing the game. And the developers have already confirmed that cosmetic packs will be the sole form of monetization long-term for the game. So there you have it, our thoughts on Saber Interactive's long-awaited sequel, Space Marine 2. Friends, we had a blast playing through this game and hope you consider checking it out if you're itching for a highly replayable third-person shooter. While we sadly didn't get to test Eternal War, we can say without a shadow of a doubt that 2/3 of this game is rock solid, and a lot of that comes down to the combat, which is sharp and satisfying, the world, which is massive and engaging, and the overall customization, both tangible and superficial, that give you complete control over your Space Marine. This is a game that's fantastic right out of the box, but give it a couple weeks and a few small patches, and I think it'll be as close to a 10 out of 10 as you'll find in 2024. There's just a lot to be excited about here, and with the roadmap already released, the future is looking very bright for yet another Warhammer 40K game. As always, if you appreciate the work that goes into playing, writing, and producing this content, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and consider subscribing. And don't forget to check out our build guides dropping for every class leading up to the game's worldwide launch. But you can only do that if you keep it right here. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.